Hello, everyone, and good evening from the Red Sea Coast. My name is Kevin Stensberg, and I'm the manager for graduate services at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, or KAUST, which is located about an hour north of Jeddah here in Saudi Arabia. And I'm also currently a doctoral candidate in the Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership Studies program at Northeastern University in Boston. And my focus of my research, I'm doing an action research study on the helping Western expatriate student affairs and services staff members who are working on the Arabian Peninsula build their global dexterity and their cultural kind of appreciation and awareness. Normally, I see Brenda one day every year. We normally go out to dinner as she's leaving TPA and I'm arriving for NASPA's International Symposium. We missed it last year. We're going to miss it this year, but I'm at least thankful to get to see her tonight. So I'm going to share my story, and I will take time afterwards to answer any questions. I'm also 100% happy to connect on LinkedIn if you have other things you want to talk about or you want to schedule a coffee chat. Just if you do that, just send me a message on LinkedIn, just kind of letting me know how we connected, and I'd be totally happy to do that. Because one of the things I'm going to talk about tonight is the importance of networking to get into this field, and I'm happy to be that person for you, just as people were for me. So I'll start by sharing my story. So I grew up in a small mill town in central Wisconsin. And the first time that I can really remember thinking about culture is I had this aunt who, she and her brother went to Norway to visit the farm where my family originated from before they immigrated to the United States just before the US Civil War. I remember them saying as they were getting ready for this trip that they were going to go visit the farm where my family worked before they moved. And I was maybe 9, 10 or so at that time. And I can remember thinking how strange that was to me. So the house that I lived in, that my parents still live in, only one person had ever lived in it before that. And that person had actually gotten evicted and had kind of destroyed the house before they left. And I just thought, I can't imagine that person showing up here and us inviting him in for dinner, much less, a house, a building that's older than any physical human-made structure I've ever seen, or someone from the United States mailing me a letter saying that their ancestors lived in my home and wanted to meet with me. The whole thing was just kind of just so foreign to me that it really got me intrigued and like, well, what is going to happen? And I didn't know anybody else who had ever been overseas at that time. So I was just really interested in seeing what her story would be. Now, if you have any Scandinavian background, you may already have a hint of how this story ends, which is that, my great aunt and her family went over and they visited, and they went to this farmhouse and they sat down at this, with this family and had dinner. And over the course of dinner, discovered that they were at the wrong farm. So they weren't even in the right place. But she brought back this story, and it sort of, built this idea in my mind of what else might be out there and what other perspectives might be out there, and how connected the world could be. When I went to do my undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin Stout, I had still this very small frame of how the world worked, but I had this dream of going out and seeing it. And what I decided to do was get a degree in hotel restaurant management, because in my head, there were hotels all around the world. And if I could get a job at a hotel, then that would be my ticket out of central Wisconsin and go everywhere. And like is true for a lot of student affairs folks, while I was at undergrad, I had a hall director who dramatically impacted my experience and helped me to see that I could get some intrinsic rewards and do some other things. So I switched to service management, and then eventually went on and got my master's degree in higher education administration. Now, while I was an undergrad, the critical mistake I made, and that I want to share with you, is that I didn't tell anybody about this vision I had, this interest I had in exploring other cultures and seeing the world in different ways and living abroad. I think that I just didn't think it was realistic enough to think it could be actualized, so I didn't share it. And that was a huge mistake. Now, working in the field and looking back, I know that had I told people this, someone would have said, well, you really need to study abroad. Like that's an experience you should get on your resume. Also for myself, I was a first generation college student. I was worried about debt. So I went through college as fast as I could. I worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs at a time. I graduated in 3 years just to minimize costs. And that meant things like I didn't take a single foreign language credit beyond what I absolutely needed to graduate. But I didn't have the big picture in mind of what I really wanted to know and have on my resume and be able to go do. I just saw boxes to tick. And unfortunately, I continued to make that mistake for 6 years after grad school. So what happened is I went to grad school, I finished grad school. I was very fortunate that I got an Akuhawai internship between that first and second year of grad school at Rutgers University in Newark. And after I graduated, they hired me and I moved there. And in many ways, that brought me the cultural things I wanted. Newark was such a very different place than where I had grown up. It's just 15 miles outside of New York City, so I got to experience city life for the first time. I don't know if this is still accurate or not, but at that time, that was the most ethnically diverse campus in the United States. So the students I was working with and the staff I was working with were tremendously diverse. It was a great learning experience. But this idea I had of wanting to live overseas is something that I still hid from people. You know, I didn't share it because I was nervous it wasn't possible. And I say that several times because the number one thing that changed for me was when I started telling people this, because people wanted to support that vision. So if you're here on this call and this is something you want to do, you know, post about this on Facebook, find out who's in your network and get them to build it. I made that change in 2009. I moved to DC for love. That did not work out, but I still recommend that kind of move. And when I went to DC, I had an interview at Georgetown University with Dr. Todd Olson. And he asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And for the first time in my career, I gave an honest answer to that, which is, you know, I want to come here and I want to do some things, but what I really want to do is I want to leverage all this global stuff at Georgetown to leave here and go do this other thing. And I thought for sure when I walked out of that interview that it was the wrong answer and I would never get that job. But it wasn't. It wasn't. Being transparent and honest and excited about something is the best way to present yourself, you know. And Georgetown totally came through for me on this. I regularly say that the door that opened the world to me opened from the 5th floor of the Student Center, the Levy Center at Georgetown University. And because I was open and honest and transparent about where I wanted to go, all of my student affairs colleagues supported me on this. So Georgetown University allowed me to get a certificate in international business management, which they paid for. My supervisor, Stephanie Lynch, gave me professional development time. I went on a 3-week excursion that ACPA and Semester at Sea did together, where we got on the ship and we went through parts of Central America and up the Amazon River. And Dr. Katie Wildman did a kind of a workshop on that trip about how higher education works in other parts of the world, which was fascinating. My colleague who worked across the hall from me, worked in a different department, Charlene Brown McKenzie, invited me on my first international trip with students. I went and chaperoned a group of students on a trip to Belize and Guatemala. A colleague that worked in international affairs, Mari McHenry, invited me to co-facilitate an intergroup dialogue that happened transnationally between the US and Switzerland. And 2 very dear colleagues, Ariel Ashley and Bill Huff, went with me to Switzerland to present at my first international conference. So like all along the way, there were people who had an interest in kind of being a part of this vision and supporting this vision. And the only difference was that I told people. So, you know, be transparent about what you want to do. That culminated in one day, one of my colleagues, Viraj Patel, showed up in my office and said, I found your next job. And she had, on her alma mater's listserv, was a posting for a job that I would never have seen anywhere else. And it was for a dean of students in Beijing, China, working for a US-owned study abroad company. I applied, and as serendipitous as the world can be sometimes, it turns out that that study abroad program had been founded by the Jesuits, and the specific Jesuit who had founded it was living at Georgetown. So we went out for tea and had a conversation, and I ended up in Beijing. So my first international assignment didn't happen for 10 years after I finished college because of these mistakes I made. So learning a foreign language, getting that international experience on your resume, studying abroad if you have an opportunity to do so, being open and transparent about what you want to do. These are things. Leverage your own network. In China, I had a great experience. So I was the Dean of Students for the Beijing Center for Chinese Studies, which is accredited through Loyola University Chicago, and it's housed at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Loved the job. It was a study abroad job. We traveled 5 weeks out of every semester with students to all different parts of the country. It's fascinating. And when I left that job, what I really wanted to do was travel and see the world. And so what I did is I strung together 3 one-semester contract jobs, all in student affairs and services, so that I could use the time between those to do some backpacking. 2 of those 1 semester jobs were both with Northeastern University. You will see that they are constantly posting. These jobs are normally in the fall semester. They're posting for site staff for a program they call the NUN program. I know that they have been at TPE in the past because I'm a good friend with the recruiter, Kate Berge. And I can't recommend that experience highly enough if you're looking for a short-term overseas assignment. I worked for them twice as a site director, once in Thessaloniki, Greece, and once in London. And in between those 2, I worked as an assistant executive dean for Semester at Sea. Again, another experience that I cannot recommend highly enough. They're a great organization to work for, and they do all the right things when it comes to, culture and learning and students and student development. It's a wonderful organization to work for if a 1 semester experience is for you. That was like a 2-year period of my life. And in that time, I got to see the world. I've now been to over 100 countries and 6 continents, and I've done all those things. There was also some downtime. When the end of that job in London came, I had been without an address for about 2 years, and Brenda will know well because she was one of my supporters during this time. I decided I need to find a permanent job. And it took about 9 months to get here. 4 months of job searching before I was offered this job, and then 5 more months before the visa came through. And so for those 9 months, I was unemployed. So if any of you are in that situation, especially this year with COVID, I'm happy to talk through how I kind of worked through that as well. Here, and I've been here for now for a little over 4 years, I primarily work with housing administration and building new student housing, but I also have run the student center and work with orientation programs. So that's kind of my experience in a nutshell. I am going to post quick to the chat a couple of resources that I want to make sure you all have. So the first one is this book, Supporting Students Globally in Higher Education. I recommend, probably if you work at a university that has a student affairs program, you probably have this in the library. This is an excellent resource. There's a chapter in here that I had the opportunity to co-write on finding international employment. That's published by NASPA. Also in here, the second thing I've put in the chat is a document called Student Affairs and Services in Higher Education, Global Foundations, Issues and Best Practices. This is a 3rd edition publication that's put together by IASIS, and you can download it for free. Just Google those words and you can download it for free. And basically what that book does is it kind of gives you a snapshot of how student affairs is situated in different parts of the world. It has country reports, and that is networking gold if you know what countries you're interested in working in, because it lists the authors and you can contact them. The one for Saudi Arabia, or one of the authors for Saudi Arabia, is one of my colleagues, and nothing would please him more than if you wrote to him saying, hey, I'd love to learn more about how you do this work in Saudi Arabia. So that's a good resource. And then the last 2 are upcoming conferences that are international in nature that both still have open calls for programming. So this is a great chance to get some international experience on your resume. The first one is the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, Manasseh, NASPA conference. This happens at the beginning of March. It's going to be virtual in 2021, so there's no travel costs involved. You can do it from anywhere. There's usually around 200 participants, mostly from the Manasseh region. And then lastly is the NASPA International Symposium. Again, it's going to be virtual this year. I believe it's in the second half of March. And this is a dramatically international audience and a good opportunity, again, to get your name out there. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I've known you for a very long time, and I'm still amazed when you retell your story, that the experiences that you've had. And based off the reactions of the chat, I think many folks were surprised, in awe, and really energized by what you shared. I am going to open it up, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have a direct question to ask Kevin. If not, then I do have a few kind of questions I could ask, but I'll pause and see if there's anyone currently that wishes to ask a question.
I have a quick question. Hi, my name's Ashley. I use she, her pronouns. I am a 2nd-year master's student studying higher education and student affairs. And as you can imagine, my education for these 2 years of my master's has been very American-centric. And I'm just curious, like with your, college experience, how do you go into these different countries being really aware of, I guess, like a colonial mindset, and how you kind of counter that in your work?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's nice to meet you. I should say too, I use he, him pronouns. I think the answer depends on the context of where I'm working. So for example, when I was in China, my job was as a study abroad administrator. So working primarily with students coming from the United States, but there for the specific purpose of helping them to learn about China, right? So in that context, most of my staff were Chinese, and most of the things that we tried to do had to do with adapting to Chinese customs or Chinese culture or learning about China. So in that context, it was very kind of straightforward and easy. I was not there trying to impart anything, except in the ways that weren't sort of colonizing. So for example, standardizing the way we did our student insurance, those kinds of things. You know, I brought in that end of student affairs, but without doing that. An opposite experience would be what I did with Northeastern, right? So in Northeastern, I have a group of American students who are at an American university, and they're there to learn some things about the culture they're in, but it isn't the same kind of deep dive study abroad. In fact, Northeastern doesn't look at NUN program as a study abroad program at all. It's just a different sort of start to the college education. And they're first semester, first year students. So there, we're doing this more in a building your own awareness of who you are and using the fact that you're in a different place to do that. So the site staff also teach a credit-bearing course that it would be kind of like a social justice 101 as well as like a college 101. And so we go through, you know, different identity development models and acculturation and all those kinds of things. But doing it at a different level because of, you know, who those students are and where they are in their college experience. And then here it's a completely different situation. So now I'm working at a graduate institution that is specifically trying to build some models that are based on Western education. And so I've really been brought here to bring that in. So some of those things aren't education related. For example, in the housing project, I'm working on helping to build like ADA accessible apartments. ADA is not the law here, but it's more robust than the law here, and it's the level they want to meet. Similar with some of our like co-curricular programming models, that they are still kind of based on a US model, but they very much take into account Saudi culture. So for example, in the US, our focus would be on self-authorship and helping students to become, you know, independent individuals. And that's very much the opposite of what you would do here, where here it's really about, you know, becoming ever more a part of a community and family and building support. And it's not so much about standing out as an individual, but still trying to do it with the two models to kind of meet. So it's a complex answer to a question, but it's a complex, kind of complex issue.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Kevin. My name is Christopher. You see him pronouns. First, you know, thank you for participating in this session. It's really cool. And it's definitely something that I'm personally interested in is working abroad, understanding that there are a lot of challenges that go along with that. But I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience in, like you mentioned, kind of stringing together multiple single semester positions at a variety of places, you know, and how did you, you know, how did you manage that? How did you manage that with like family? So I personally have a spouse and a kid, and I'm curious about navigating that aspect, even if maybe you don't have a whole ton of ability to insight on that portion of it.
Sure. Well, first I can say from my end, what I knew I was leaving China. That much I knew. My contract was coming to an end. I wasn't renewing it. I had bought a one-way ticket to South Africa, and my idea was if I don't find a job, I'll just slowly work my way up the east coast of Africa until I run out of cash, and then I'll go home and figure out my life. I saw this posting for the NUN job, and I got that. And then by the time I started that job, the semester at sea job had been posted. It wasn't until I was already on the ship that the next job had been posted. So some of it was kind of a wing and a prayer and being okay with being jobless if I needed to be for a while. That was actually kind of the plan, was to be jobless and to sort of be a little bit of a nomad for a while. I will say to connect them, it was all about relationships. And so for example, the first time I applied for the NUN job, I did the interview. I went to LinkedIn and looked up all the people who I'd interviewed with, and I only had one second connection. And it was the roommate of a friend of mine who I worked with previously in DC. who I had met briefly once, and I reached out to her and said, "Hey, could you put in a word, for me with your friend Kristen?" And she did, and she also barely knew Kristen. They had gone to grad school together, but weren't super close or anything. But it didn't hurt. And what I learned is that when I actually arrived to Boston that fall, I was the only person in a site director job who didn't have a direct contact with somebody in the office. So that little bitty nudge that somebody reached out and did a little favor for me made a tremendous difference. And I will say the same thing with Semester at Sea. I had applied for Semester at Sea previously, I think 2 separate semesters, with never an interview. But this time, when I really wanted to do it, I put it out on Facebook that this is what I want to do if anyone has any contacts. And several people, the main one was Maggie Burghardt Evans. She really did me a solid. But people just put in a good word for me. So I would recommend that. In terms of families, so I'm not personally aware of anyone who's done the NU Win gig with family, but I've only done it twice and they've been doing it for years. So it might be possible. Semester at Sea is absolutely possible with a family. And the other jobs I have would also be possible. In fact, here in Coast, I would say that probably the people who have the best experience are people here with young families, because there's an excellent international school here. It's a very safe environment, very multicultural place, really good place to raise a family.
If not, Kevin, go ahead, Peggy.
Can I ask one? Yeah, this
Yes,
might,
go right ahead.
sorry, I don't have my picture on because I'm having my house window clean and it's a disaster behind me. And I also have a mask on because the guys are all around. So thank you for doing this. Very interesting. I am a dual citizen with Ireland and been over there many times and spoke at the Irish Student Affairs Conference years ago. But my question or observation is I'm at the tail end of my career. I'm 60 and thinking that this is a good time because I'm more of a consultant coach. And some of the ideas that you gave are intriguing to me, like the Northeastern one, to go somewhere for a semester. But I'm just wondering if you, in your travels or your observations, are there people more who are, 60 plus trying to do this too? And there's that whole little bit of an age discrimination factor going on about, veterans, do they have enough energy or are they current? And a lot of people like me have stayed very current, all along. So just any observations about that?
Yeah, I don't think you'd have any trouble at all, to be honest. So just in my own frame, the job I had in China, the person who first had that job was there 8 years. And I wouldn't say that she was retirement age, but she was a woman who was senior in her career, and she was beloved by the students, and she did fantastic work there. And in that culture, being older gave her a lot of respect, so it worked to her advantage. In my experience, the 2 Northeastern jobs, there weren't people at that stage in their career, but again, I was only there twice, and that's not the whole picture. So there's no reason somebody who's older couldn't do it. Semester at Sea, there were all kinds of people in that range. I think Semester at Sea has also like a lifelong learner kind of program where people can be participants on the ship, even in retirement. There were lots of faculty who were on sabbatical, so I wouldn't say they were retired, but they were taking kind of a break period. Here, it's a little bit challenging because in Saudi Arabia, there is a mandatory retirement at 60. So you have to be in a very specialized field to be able to get an exemption beyond that. But I think that's quite rare. I think in most places it would be fine. And my perception is that the more experience you have, the easier it would be.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are some good options.
Great.
Kevin, we're coming up on time, and so I want to reserve the last minute or two for you to maybe kind of wrap up your experience or end on a bit of useful knowledge or wisdom that you might want to share with the group. And certainly remember that he has offered his LinkedIn access if you would like to continue the conversation beyond today's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the main takeaways I have are, if you have a vision, share that vision with people and invest in yourself to make that vision come to fruition. And that might be a very specific place you want to work or specific job you want to do, or it might be very general, but just live that and kind of will that into being. And I think don't be so afraid of taking a risk, because even if you take the safe route, right, and you stay at a job for 25 years, COVID can come along and it's gone. And that was the safe route. So, don't be afraid to just kind of follow your dream. The worst case is you end up back where you started, and that's not such a bad place, because we're all in a pretty good place. I am, as Brenda said, I'm happy to chat further. If you do want to connect in LinkedIn, please just send me a message just saying, how we're connected, so that I remember that, especially in case later on we need to utilize each other as a network. I can look back at those messages, but I'm very happy to do so. I know a lot of you are coming in from the US, so you may have a break coming up. It's not a holiday here, so it's a great time for me to schedule calls for coffee chats with colleagues.
Thank you so much. And thank you again, Kevin, and those for you attending. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind folks that as part of our TPE experience, we are spending the rest of this month and parts of December talking about the international search. And so look for more information on December 2nd. We'll be hosting a panel where we will broaden this conversation and have perspectives from varying lenses as related to the international search process. Thank you again for your time today and evening. I appreciate your participation and support of TPE and our initiatives, and enjoy the rest of your month and semester and breaks. Thank you again, Kevin.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Bye.